Here are the Beatles. Here are the Beatles.
What would you like to see happen for the Beatles in the future, John?
Uh, I'd like them to see them get the money they've earned, which they haven't had yet. But our good friend Mr. Klein will see to that. And for them to be happy, to do whatever they want to do. Because whatever happens to the Beatles, so-called, we'll always be sort of friends. So all I want for the Beatles is their individual happiness.
We started off in Liverpool and we wanted to go and be famous, wanted to write a lot of songs and have a lot of success everywhere. Once we'd done that, and once we'd conquered places like North America and stuff like that, I think we began to feel that we'd done it. That we were also getting to the age when most people leave the army and get married. I think the point was that during the Beatles was the only relationship we were really had time for.
Can you remember when you realized that it was inevitable that you would split up?
I wouldn't know. First, no. It's like saying, did you remember falling in love? Not quite. Just sort of happens.
We actually broke it up ourselves because we wanted to spend time in different spaces.
I mean, we just wanted to be free as individuals.
Over the years, I had such a lot of songs mounting up that I really wanted to do, but I only got my quota of 1 or 2 tunes per album. Mm-hmm. And that way I would have had to have recorded about 100 Beatle albums just to get out the tunes I had in 1965.
In the Beatles, by the time the Beatles were at their peak, we were cutting each other down to size. We were limiting our capacity to write and perform by having to fit it into some kind of format.
I'm certainly ready to be able to, to try and work things out with whoever I'm with, But I mean, if whoever I'm with is full of hassles, then I'm not going to be with him, am I? I'm going to go with somebody else. I got tired of being with the Beatles because musically, it was like being in a bag, and they wouldn't let me out the bag. Really, which was mainly Paul at that time, the conflict musically for me was Paul. And yet I could play with any other band or musician and, have a reasonably good time.
What was the conflict with Paul? I don't understand.
Well, it's just the thing like, he'd written all these songs for years and stuff, and Paul and I went to school together, I got the feeling that, everybody changes, and sometimes people don't want other people to change, or they, even if you do change, they won't accept that you've changed, and they keep in their mind some other image of you,
When John hooked up with Yoko so sort of intensely, it was kind of obvious that there could be no looking back after that.
Everybody seemed to be paranoid except for us two who were in the glow of love. Everything's clear and open when you're in love, and everybody sort of was tense around us, and what is she doing here at the session, or why is she with him? And
let's face it, we didn't welcome Yoko in the studio because we thought it was a guy thing. Even the guys' wives and the girlfriends and stuff weren't really welcome in the studio. They could, control room for a quick visit.
They were, from that point on, never to be seen without each other. For the next few years at least.
But actually sit in the studio with us, it was like, no, excuse me, we're working. We were just fuming.
All this sort of madness is going on around us because we just happen to want to be together all the time.
I mean, we all got annoyed when she sort of, one day she showed up in the studio and in her bed, and while we were making a record, she was sort of lying in the bed.
It's the same. You can quote Paul, you can look at it in the papers. He said many times that at first he hated Yoko and then he got to like her. It's too late for me.
But you had two sets of feelings. One was just, we are the Beatles and we ought to be left alone to make our record. And then the other feeling was, but John, who is one of the Beatles, wishes to do this. So we can't tell him no. So it was kind of quite difficult to know what to do.
And George insulted her right to her face in Apple office at the beginning, just being straightforward. That game of well, I'm going to be up front because this is what I've heard. And Dylan and a few people said you've got a lousy name in New York, and you give off bad vibes. That's what George said to her, and we both sat through it. And I didn't hit him. I don't know why. Ringo was all right. So was Maureen. But the other two really gave it to us. I don't forgive him for that.
You know, and a lot of days, even with all the craziness, it really works still. Instead of working every day, it worked like 2 days a month. Yeah. You know, and there was still good days.
Yeah, well, everything's fun off and on, you know. So I suppose it could have gone on being fun off and on, or it could have gone worse. I don't know. It's just when you grow up, you know, we don't want to be the crazy gang, which they might know over here, which is British, or the Marx Brothers, which is sort of being dragged on stage playing She Loves You when we've got, you know, asthma and tuberculosis, and when we're 50, you know, here they are again, yesterday, oh my God.
We were great creators and we could do all of that, but we were nobody had half an idea about a budget.
Nobody had any ability to be a business manager.
It's easy after the fact, you know, people are always saying about Apple and the Beatles business. Why didn't you? Why didn't you? You sit in there with millions of dollars floating around and try and work it out. It's so easy after the fact to say, why didn't you?
And during the making of the White Album, things started to get a little bit edgy. And things really did start to kind of disintegrate a little bit. And eventually when Alan Klein came in, I think he was the kind of the final straw.
Klein had been managing the Rolling Stones, and I believe Donovan.
He got a meeting with John and Yoko the night before we were due to have a big sort of State of the Nation meeting. And John and Yoko arrived the next day, and John issued a statement saying, all my affairs are now in the hands of Alan Klein. Everything I do must go through him.
There seems like such animosity between Paul and,
Yeah.
you know, you three. I mean, it sounds like he is saying all over.
But it's more of a personal thing, you know, that's down to the management situation. You know, because he wanted Lee Eastman, you know, his in-laws to run it, and we didn't.
I'd put forward Lee Eastman, Linda's dad, as a possible sort of lawyer and possibly someone to do. But they said, no, he'd be just too biased against you, for you and against us.
Then that's the only reason, you know, that's the whole basis. But that's only a personal problem that he'll have to get over, because that's the reality is that, you know, he's outvoted, and, you know, we're a partnership. We got these companies which we all own 25% of each.
Well, the three of us felt, the three of us have gone this way, you know, why don't you?
And if there's a decision to be made, then like in any other business or group, you have a vote, you know, and he was outvoted 3-1, and if he doesn't like it, it's really a pity, you know, because we're trying to do what's best for the Beatles as a group or best for Apple as a company. We're not trying to do what's best for Paul and his in-laws, you know.
They were sort of my best mates in the world, kind of. They're four of us against the world. And then suddenly, you know, it wasn't like that. It was, in fact, one time it was 3 against me because I decided to not go with this guy, this manager guy, New York guy, Alan Klein.
Do you think that's what the key
is?
of...
Yeah, because it's on such a personal level that it is, you know, a big problem, really. You know, you imagine that situation if you were married and you wanted your in-laws to handle certain things. But it's all right.
I don't know. I'm not as optimistic.
It's all right. All things pass away, as they say.
I'd been arguing for weeks about his percentage and stuff. I figured we were a big act. We could give him 15%. The others were saying, no, he's got to have 20. I said, we're big act guys.
You know, he's isolated himself from us, which is really his own doing, which is what we talked about because of the business thing, because the three chose to have Alan Klein manage Apple.
But I announced it to myself and to the people around me on the way to Toronto a few days before, and on the plane Alan came with me. I told Alan, you know, it's over. And then when I got back, there was a few meetings, and Alan had said, well, cool it, because there was a lot to do, you know.
And we were due to sign a deal with Capitol Records, which was what we were all there for, this meeting. And Klein apparently had said to John, look, don't say anything. John had expressed his desire to, like, leave the group. And Klein, being a businessman, had said, don't say anything till after they've signed the new Capitol deal, which he was involved with.
Alan was saying, don't tell. He didn't want me to tell Paul even, you know. But I couldn't help, so I told him it's out. You know, I couldn't stop it. It came out, and Paul and Alan said they were glad that I wasn't going to announce it. That I was going to make an event out of it. You know?
So John was at that meeting, and he just suddenly let it out. He just looked at us all. We were sitting around like this, and John just said, I wasn't going to tell you till after you signed the Capitol deal. He said, but I'm leaving the group. And he just looked at us, and our jaws just fell. And we all went kind of white. And he said, it's kind of a great feeling, telling you. It's kind of an adrenaline rush. He said, it's like, you know, telling someone you're getting divorced. He said, it's kind of, you know, a little bit weird, but I'm leaving the group.
I don't know whether Paul said, don't tell anybody, but he was damn pleased that I wasn't. You know, he said, oh, well, that means nothing really happened if you're not going to say anything. Then 6 months later, he comes out with whatever, you know.
I decided that it was time to tell the world rather than just keep pretending we were still a group when we weren't for 4 months.
So he rang me up on that day and said, I'm doing what you and Yoko are doing and putting out an album, and I'm leaving the group too, he said. I said, good, you know, I was a little, you know, feeling a little strange because he was saying it this time, you know, although it was a year later.
And I let it out in a statement with an album I put out called McCartney.
And then the Midnight Papers came out, you know. I was a fool not to do it, you know.
Well,
not to do what Paul did, which is use it to sell a record.
In fact, John got annoyed with me.
We were all hurt that he didn't tell us what he was going to do, but I think he claims that he didn't mean that to happen, but that's bullshit.
But at that time, I was still involved making records for Apple. I was thinking, and Apple is sort of, nobody wants to do anything, you know. I mean, I don't blame John and Paul, really didn't want to know about that. They just wanted, you know, let's just chop it up into 4 pieces and let's get out of it. But at the same time, I was involved. I was committed to certain things. And there was some talk with Ringo and I, you know, what we were planning to do at that time as John and Paul didn't really want to know about Apple, we were just going to try and get the rights to take over Apple Records. And then we just put a new logo under new management, bring in a couple of new people, and keep going.
The group broke up. It wasn't particularly between me and John. It was just between all of the group.
I never thought we'd come to that because I didn't think we were that stupid. But we were naive enough to let people come between us, and that's what happened, you know.
Because I said to my lawyers, I said, no, can we sue this Alan Klein bloke? Yeah. They said, no, he's not a party to any of the agreements. I said, oh, they said, if you want to sue, if you want to get... because
you've got to sue...
You've got to sue the guys.
And they said, what did John say when he found out you were suing him?
Not exactly pleased.
Yeah.
Do you think businessmen were responsible? Well, no, it's like anything. When people would decide to get a divorce, you know, quite often you decide amicably. But when you get your lawyers and they say, don't talk to the other party, unless there's a lawyer present, then that's when the drift really starts happening. And then when you can't speak to each other without a lawyer, then there's no communication.
In the end, though, we were always, if we argued, we'd always argue about music or something like that. It would never be a really sort of big argument. Pretty much everything was taken care of in companies and so on. But I think the crunch came when what we started to argue about was business, the Apple business.
And it's really lawyers that make divorces nasty. You know, if there was a nice ceremony like getting married for divorce, it would be much better. Even divorce, it wouldn't be so nasty, but it always gets nasty because you're never allowed to speak your own mind. You have to talk in double Dutch. You have to spend all your time with a lawyer, and you get frustrated, and you end up saying and doing things you wouldn't really do under normal circumstances.
And you get one viewpoint from so-and-so, and so-and-so's lawyer, and so-and-so's. Everyone was represented on all these sides. And I think that just when the game changed to a money game instead of a music game, it was one we didn't have a framework to exist in. This is my theory, anyway.
We'd all decided it was the end. How difficult was it for you to accept that breakup? I mean, it must have
the breakup was horrendous. Is that what you're getting to?
Well, yeah, I mean, it must
You want to see me cry?
No, I don't.
It was a slow death, and it was happening. It's evident and let it be. Although Linda and Yoko were evident then, but they weren't when we started it, I don't think. It was evident in India when George and I stayed there and Paul and Ringo left, and it was evident on the White Album, you know. It's just natural. It's not a great disaster. People keep talking about it as if it's the end of the earth. It's only a rock group that split up. It's nothing important. You know, you have all the old records there if you want to reminisce.